The night sky was covered in darkness, but it was not a still darkness. It was a space full of the movement of stars. The Sea of Galilee, its surface as smooth as glass, reflected the bright, clear moonlight. Our boat drifted slowly across the lake, gliding gently as if it had no weight at all. My hands gripped the oar, but not out of fear. There was another feeling, a strange feeling, as if I was embarking on a journey I could not turn back from. I didn't understand why I was here, in the middle of this vast, uncertain sea, with Jesus, a man I had never met but felt inexplicably familiar. He didn't need to say anything. The way he sat quietly, looking ahead as if he knew everything that was coming, as though he had seen my entire life, made me feel even more confused. I felt something powerful, like an electric current running through me, something I couldn't explain. But one thing I knew for sure, I was no longer the same. Jesus sat there on this little boat like a guide, and I was the one following. I had heard many stories about him, about the miracles he performed, but nothing could have prepared me for this feeling. We didn't speak to each other. Only silence surrounded us, but within that silence, there was a fire burning brightly in my heart. I knew he was doing something, leading me into a journey not only across the surface of this lake, but into the depths of my own soul. A breeze began to blow across the lake, as gentle as a caress. I felt lost, unable to know what he was thinking, but at the same time, unable to leave his side. His eyes looked far out, as if gazing into a place so distant, a place beyond time, beyond space, only light. I couldn't stop thinking, why did he choose me? Who am I? Just an ordinary fisherman, living day to day with my trips out to sea, hoping that one day I could escape the poverty surrounding me. But then I realized the answer no longer needed to be searched for. I had found myself in his light. Jesus turned to me, his gaze deep, as if he knew every thought in my heart. "Do you have a question?" he asked, his voice gentle but also firm. I couldn't answer immediately. Only one big question remained in my mind. "Who are you? Have you seen me?" he asked again, but without expecting an answer. I only felt his eyes pointing to something I hadn't yet seen, a truth that had already existed within me. I still couldn't speak, but tonight, I understood that my journey was not just to follow someone, but to find myself in his presence. Chapter 1, Night Waves. There are nights when you simply can't sleep, not because of the wind, but because memories begin to knock softly on the window frame of your soul. My name is Aram, an old fisherman living in a village by the Sea of Galilee. If you've ever walked along the narrow dirt path that hugs the water's edge, past the olive trees fading in the morning mist, you might have seen my small house, a thatched roof, crumbling walls, and clotheslines full of worn-out nets. I once lived solely to catch fish and avoid storms. But one night, the sea was no longer just the sea. The waves were no longer just waves. And a hand, yes, a hand, reached out from the darkness and dissolved a lifetime of fear. That's how the story begins. On a moonless night, when the wind turned against us and every heart felt on the verge of breaking, I sat alone by the charcoal fire, listening to the crackle of burning wood, mending a torn net from the catch that afternoon. The night wind from the east carried a cold mist and unfamiliar sounds. The creak of wood from drifting boats offshore, the slap of waves against rocks like the beat of a panicked heart. And then I saw him, not in a dream, not in my imagination, but with my eyes, with my heart, and with a trembling I could not pretend away. A man was walking on the water. Chapter 2. The Man from the Lake. The north wind turned into the sigh of night. It slid across the lake's surface, through the olive branches, past the thin smoke rising from my stove, and crashed into the water like someone gently waking a sleeping soul. I was still by the fire, silent, my eyes fixed on the Sea of Galilee, the very lake that had sustained me my entire life, and yet, tonight it felt foreign. Their boat was far from shore, the flickering oil lamp no more than a tiny star. I could make out their silhouettes against the sail's outline. Peter, James, John, men I'd seen in passing at the market village or in crowds listening to sermons under the trees. Jesus wasn't with them that night. I knew that for certain. Some said he had stayed behind to pray on the mountain. Others whispered he often wandered alone at night, like someone who didn't quite belong here. And then, it happened. First, I thought it was fog. A low white mist, like a trail of smoke, gliding over the water. I squinted, stood up fully, and stepped to the edge of the rocks. But it didn't move like fog. It had a form, a stride, and it was drawing near. I forgot the fire, forgot the boiling pot. My heart opened into an empty space. My eyes widened like never before. My chest pounded as if trying to leap free. That person was walking on the lake, step by step, slowly. The water didn't swallow his feet, didn't dampen his robe. He didn't stumble, didn't sway, just walked. I shivered. What I felt wasn't awe or wonder. It was fear, a deep primal fear, as if I were witnessing something not meant to be seen, as if heaven had opened, and I was just a blade of straw on the lakeshore. A soft blue light from the moon cast down, and I saw his face, peaceful, not smiling, not stern, his eyes a quiet, deep, like the Sea of Galilee that night. No drama, no halo. But I couldn't look away. No one could, once they'd seen him the way I saw him that night. From afar, a scream rang out. On the boat, the disciples had seen him. I heard panic, stammering cries through the wind. "It's a ghost!" someone shouted. The wind carried the rest away. And then, his voice rang out. Not loud, but clear, like even the wind paused to listen. "Take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid." Just 3 sentences, but enough to make the lake go still. Enough for me to forget who I was, forget my age, forget the hard life I'd known. All I knew was this: he didn't belong to fear. In that moment, something strange happened. One of the men on the boat, Peter, I recognized him, stood up, gripping the boat's edge, eyes fixed on Jesus, and called out, voice trembling but unbroken, "Lord, if it's really you, let me come to you on the water." The boat fell silent. I held my breath, and Jesus said just one word, "Come." Chapter 3. The Old Boat and the Worn Net. Before I go on with Peter stepping out of the boat, let me tell you something. None of us, those who live by the lake, ever take the water lightly. The Sea of Galilee may sound gentle, but it's a wild, living thing. Some days it's as soft as silk. Other nights, it roars like a beast, waves rising like silver hills, ready to swallow life whole in a single breath. I grew up with the waves. My father died to the wind. My brother vanished in a storm when we were young, and I barely made it home one winter in the year 56. So I know this. No one steps out of a boat at night unless they're mad, or called by something stronger than life itself. My boat back then, the old one I still keep behind the house, next to the pile of frayed ropes, had been with me through nearly 30 fishing seasons. Its wooden ribs bent like an old man's back, patched with copper nails. The wood, stained by salt and sweat, had faded into the color of time. And the net, that net, I once mended it by hand when I was young. Every tear marked a rainy day, every knot a story. Once I sat with some market village kids, teaching them how to tie knots, and I said, "This net catches more than fish. It catches dreams, sorrows, the patience of a lifetime." They laughed, thinking I was joking, but I wasn't. I tell you this so you understand. Fishermen like Peter, John, and me, we cling to our boats and nets like we cling to the meaning of life. To step out of the boat at night in a storm is something unthinkable. Yet that night I saw Peter let go of the wood rail. His foot touched the edge of the boat, the wind pulling at his robe, his hair wild. Waves crashed. The wind howled, as if the lake itself tried to hold him back. I saw him hesitate for a heartbeat, his eyes locked on Jesus. And then, he stepped out. He didn't sink. He didn't fall. 1, 2, 3 steps. Peter was walking on water. Something caught in my throat. Not because it was miraculous, but because I felt he was doing what I had longed for all my life. Stepping out of the familiar. Stepping out of the boat of fear, doubt, and burden. I had lived my whole life in safety, on the boat with the nets, and I suddenly wondered, if it had been me that night, would I have stepped out? Or would I have clung to my old boat and worn net like a habit? Though my heart had long dried up, I watched Peter take a few steps. I still fixed on Jesus. But then the wind rose fiercer. A wave crashed cold against him. Peter staggered, and I heard him cry out, "Lord, save me." Jesus didn't delay. He reached out, fast, firm, and took Peter's hand. No one fell. No one sank. Just that hand, warm, steady, and perhaps more familiar than anything we've ever known. He said, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they climbed back into the boat, the wind ceased. The waves lay still like a mirror. No one spoke. There was no need. I stood motionless on the shore until the red dawn peeked over the mountains. My heart, like that torn net, seemed to be stitched back together by something nameless. Have you ever kept an old boat in your heart? Something familiar, worn, and safe, but no longer truly alive? Maybe what you need isn't a new boat, but one step out of it, and a hand that's always ready, like that night on the Sea of Galilee. Chapter 4: The First Encounter with Him. That morning was no different from any other. The sun gently rose over the hills of Galilee, casting a soft silver light on the surface of the lake. I sat by the shore, mending a torn fishing net from yesterday's catch. My fingers were familiar with every knot, as if they were part of my own body. This was the work I had done all my life, simple, repetitive, but it was what kept me alive through both the rainy and dry seasons. Nothing was unusual until John, the young man from Zebedee's family, came running along the shore, wildly waving his arms, calling to me as if he were about to slip from a cliff. "Aram! Aram! Hurry! There is someone. A teacher. He is saying strange things." I looked up, shielding my eyes from the sun, watching John catch his breath. He was quick-witted, curious, but not easily deceived. I stood up, brushed the sand off my clothes, quickly tied the net and followed him. We walked along the narrow dirt path, where the old olive trees cast shadows over a small hill leading to the village. In the distance, I could hear the murmur of voices, the laughter of children, and an unusual silence, the silence of people caught up in something bigger than themselves. When we arrived, I stopped. Before me was a crowd gathered at the foot of the hill. There was no stage, no elevated platform, no one in ceremonial robes. In the center stood only one man, tall, lean, wearing a simple cloak. The wind blew gently, making the edges of his garment flutter like a bird's wings. The sun shone down at an angle on his long hair, and I saw his eyes that I could not look away from. He was speaking, but his voice was not the authoritative tone I had heard in the temple. His voice was gentle, yet it carried far, like waves crashing against the rocks, deep and enduring. "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." I froze. I couldn't understand why my heart was pounding so fast. Each word he spoke seemed to pierce through the dust of life, like a cool breeze on a scorching summer noon, like an invisible hand placed on my chest whispering, "This is for you. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." I don't know how long I stood there. There were moments when I forgot who I was, forgot the fishing nets, forgot the ache in my shoulder from carrying the boat for too long. I only knew that something inside me was beginning to crack, and at the same time being healed. The crowd was silent, not because they were forced to listen, but because they didn't want to miss a single word. I saw elderly people with tears in their eyes, children staring up in confusion as if they were dreaming. And I just stood there, feeling like I had been called by name in the midst of thousands of faces. After he finished speaking, the crowd dispersed slowly, like the tide retreating. I didn't leave, couldn't. Something kept me there, not my feet, but a longing. I walked slowly toward him. I said nothing. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't even know if he would look at me, if he knew who I was among the many who had heard him speak. But then he turned. Jesus looked directly at me. No words, just the gaze. A gaze as though he had known me before I was born. I felt my skin tingle, as though touching something sacred, yet very real. I was no longer the man mending nets under the sun. In that moment, I was a soul being touched not by hands, but by eyes. Then he smiled. That smile wasn't large or ornate, but it was as deep as the Sea of Galilee at dawn, warm as a fire on a cold night, and full of life like the first harvest after a long winter. I turned and walked back to the village in silence. The sun still rose as it did every day. The wind still gently blew across the lake. But I was different. I knew, though I couldn't put it into words, that this morning I had met him, and nothing in my life could ever be the same again. Chapter 5: The Hands at Work. That afternoon, I returned home later than usual. My feet didn't want to stop at the doorstep as they did every day. There was something inside me that still stirred after that morning on the hill. His words seemed to linger, not in my ears but in my chest, in every vein. Every time I tried to think of something else, a sentence would echo, "Blessed are the merciful." I sat on the porch, washing my hands, still salty from the sea, in the basin my mother had prepared. My fingers trembled slightly, not from the cold, but because I was beginning to realize how weary they had become from doing things that didn't feed my soul. My mother, the elderly woman who often gazed into the distance toward the lake, stepped out. She placed a bowl of bean soup in front of me and then sat silently. We didn't speak much. A fisherman's life teaches you to be quiet, especially after the storms. I ate slowly, spoon by spoon. Then, unexpectedly, my mother spoke, as if a gust of wind had blown through. "You met him, didn't you?" I stopped, the spoon suspended in midair. "I heard everything," she continued. "The whole village is talking. They say he's unlike anyone else. And they're right. I've heard many teachers, many priests, but no one has ever made both the old and the young go silent like that." I didn't answer. I just nodded, my eyes still fixed on the bowl. Then she placed her hand on mine, my hands, rough from nets, ropes, and salt water, and spoke softly. "These hands are strong, my son, but I think it's time for you to use them for something else." That night I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned on the old mat. Outside the window, the wind gently rustled the palm branches. I recalled the image of Jesus standing in the crowd. I remembered his gaze, and the smile that made me feel valuable, not because of my skills, not because of how much fish I caught, but simply because I thought about my hands. These hands had gripped the oar, had thrown nets in the storm, had mended boats in the middle of the night. But now they felt empty when they did nothing for him. The next morning I woke up early, very early. The sky was still dim, and the lake was still groggy. I didn't bring a net. I only brought my hands, and a yearning I had never felt before. I walked along the shore, feeling lighter than ever. And then I saw him standing there, near a group of sick people scattered across the grass. Some had lost a leg. Some were blind. Some were nothing but skin and bones, coughing painfully as if their chest might break open. And in the middle of them, Jesus bent down, touching each one. No one was left out. No one was skipped. I approached. No one turned me away. There were no barriers, no rituals, only his hands working. His hands were not as soft as the hands of the priests in the temple. They were the hands of a worker, strong, sturdy, with slight calluses on the thumb. But when placed on the sick, those hands didn't carry physical strength. They carried a tenderness that couldn't be named. I stood there, motionless. Then he turned and looked at me, and he smiled. Once again, he didn't ask who I was, didn't demand that I prove anything. He simply said, "Follow me." Just 3 words, and they swept away all doubt. I nodded, and as I stepped closer, I saw an old man sitting huddled, his back bent, his eyes dim, his hands trembling. I bent down. No more thinking, just a reflex of the heart. I placed my hand on his shoulder. First, he flinched, but then he looked up at me. No miracle happened. He didn't stand up, didn't shout, "I've been healed." But there was something in his eyes that had changed. A tiny light, very small, but unmistakable. I wasn't a doctor. I wasn't a priest. I was just a fisherman. But my hands were learning how to work for something greater. Jesus looked at me and nodded slightly, and that's when it began. From that day on, I followed him. No more long days just casting nets and mending boats. I started using my hands, those old, weathered hands, to help lift someone up, to guide an old woman across the village path, to share bread with fatherless children. And the strangest thing was, my hands had never felt lighter. Chapter 6, The Question on the Lake. The first night I sailed with Jesus, the surface of the Sea of Galilee was eerily still. There was not a single gust of wind, not even a small wave. The scenery seemed frozen in a moment beyond time. We sat in a small boat, beneath the bright moonlight, silent as if no one dared disturb the sacred stillness of the late night. Jesus said nothing, but the way he looked into the distance, his gaze as though it were aimed at a far-off place, a place beyond this world. His hands were not unfamiliar to me. They were like the hands of a craftsman, yet they were so gentle, as though they had touched things I could not understand. My world had been limited to the waves, to the work of a fisherman, to the shores where I lived. But he seemed to belong to another world, a world I could only feel in moments of silence like this one. The atmosphere in the boat grew heavy, filled with contemplation. I wanted to ask him something, but I was afraid of disturbing the peace. I felt like just a small part of everything he had done, not worthy of breaking this tranquility with a question. But then, he turned to look at me. "Your question, Aram," he said, his voice soft like the waves lapping against the shore. I was startled. How did he know I had a question? You know? Jesus smiled and gently replied, "I know, because that question has been in your heart for a long time." I couldn't say anything. Only a sigh escaped from my chest, as though a weight had been lifted. But I remained silent, unsure where to start. Jesus continued, "You want to know where I come from, to understand why I called you to follow me, right?" I didn't respond. That question had indeed been waiting for a long time, but I hadn't dared to speak it. I feared that if I asked, the answer would only complicate things, and I wouldn't be able to understand it all. But he understood, as though he knew the unspoken thoughts of my heart. "You don't need to understand everything right now, Aram," he said, his voice gentle yet full of strength. "The only way for you to understand is to follow me, do what I do, love those I love, and live the way I have lived." I looked at him, my heart stirred. A part of me felt relieved, but another part was filled with questions. His answer only left me more confused. Yet, like the first light of dawn, it began to chase away the darkness in my soul. Suddenly, a soft breeze stirred the surface of the lake. We said no more. The boat glided smoothly over the small waves. I no longer felt fear when facing the vastness of the lake. In these moments, I felt I could go farther, reach farther, because I was no longer alone. The next morning, we landed on an unfamiliar shore, one without the familiar footprints of the villagers. The crowd that followed Jesus looked at one another with uncertainty. Some stopped at the shore, unwilling to go any further, but I followed him without a second thought. We entered a small town by the lake. The scenery was much like any other place. Crooked houses, cracked dirt roads, and weary people living their daily lives. Yet, when he entered, eyes widened, and smiles began to appear. Jesus didn't stop. He continued through the crowd, but there was something different. He wasn't a stranger. These people, though they had never met him, could feel something from him. A warm, gentle, yet powerful presence. An old man stood by the roadside, his eyes clouded with age. He watched Jesus with curiosity. Jesus stopped and looked at him. "What do you need?" he asked. The old man didn't respond immediately. Perhaps he was thinking about whether or not he dared to speak. But after a moment of silence, he answered softly, I need light. I can no longer see clearly." Jesus said nothing more. He simply extended his hand and placed it over the old man's eyes. A silence enveloped the scene. The people around watched. Suddenly, the old man let out a soft gasp, and then looked around as if seeing everything for the first time. His eyes sparkled once again. The crowd stood in stunned silence. The light in the old man's eyes was not just the restoration of physical sight. It was the light of hope, a belief that something greater was present among us. Jesus looked at the old man, smiled gently, and then turned to me. "Your question has been answered, Aram." I couldn't say anything. I just knew that in that moment, I had found the answer I had always been searching for. Not from sermons or teachings, but from actions, gentle hands bringing light to the world. Chapter 7: A Night Through the Storm. At this point, we no longer sat in silence as before. Under the moonlight, the surface of the lake suddenly changed. The wind began to pick up, and small waves formed into white streaks, rolling up and crashing against the sides of the boat. The night became foggy and ominous. I gripped the oar tightly, trying to keep the boat steady amidst the fierce waves. But I felt that we were no longer ordinary people on this water. Something greater seemed to be rising. "Jesus!" I called out, but my voice was swept away by the wind and the waves. Jesus did not react. He remained seated, his gaze fixed straight ahead. There was no sign of worry, no hurry, no fear. He just sat there, as if guiding me through the storm within my soul. Suddenly, I felt a coldness envelop me. The waves grew higher, rolling up as if they wanted to swallow our boat. I began to feel the fear creeping into my heart. Each wave crashed forcefully against the boat, causing it to tilt as though it might capsize. I didn't know if I could hold on any longer. I looked at Jesus, and this time, I could no longer remain silent. "Don't you see? We're about to sink," I screamed, a sense of desperation overwhelming me. Jesus slowly turned around, his gaze as calm as though nothing were happening. He stood up, his hands slowly extending as if reaching into an unseen space. A miracle was about to happen. I could feel it. He wasn't in a rush, but each of his movements seemed to face the violent storm without concern. And then, something unbelievable happened. He spoke, not with a commanding voice, but with a tranquility I had never witnessed. "Silence," he said, as though that single word could stop everything. Suddenly, all the noise of the storm seemed to vanish. The storm, it seemed, ceased immediately. A perfect stillness took over, a complete silence, with only our breathing left, gentle and steady. I looked around, unable to believe my eyes. The waves had completely calmed, and the surface of the lake was peaceful again, as though it was before we set out. But the most miraculous thing was the change in my heart. The fear had vanished, and I felt light and at peace, as if all the worries before were merely a bad dream. Jesus sat back down, his eyes meeting mine with a gentle smile, as though he had done this 1,000 times. "Why are you so afraid?" he asked, but not with a simple question. It was a question that made me reflect on myself, on my faith and my confidence. I lowered my head, unable to answer. My mind was spinning, and my heart was still beating fast in my chest. How could someone like him do this? How could he make the storm quiet with just a soft word? He didn't wait for an answer. He continued, his voice gentle as if sharing a great secret. "Do you have faith? Faith is not something you can see with your eyes, but it is something you feel in your heart." His words clung to my soul, like an unbreakable promise. For the first time in my life, I felt safety not from what I could see, but from the faith I didn't know I had. We continued our journey across the lake in silence. Each rocking of the boat no longer made me afraid. I was no longer just following him. I felt like a part of his journey, where there was a miraculous peace I had never known before. Chapter 8: The Light in the Darkness. The storm had passed, but the stillness did not last long. Even though the waves had calmed and the wind had ceased, I still felt a deep inner transformation. We were no longer just people sitting in a boat, but seemed to be part of the ocean itself, part of this vast nature, where there was light and darkness, life and death, joy and sorrow. Jesus remained silent, but I knew that this silence was not forgetfulness. It was a boundless patience. He wasn't in a rush, not pushing us anywhere. He was leading us, not with words, but with his presence. I felt that in each moment, he was teaching me a lesson, even though I didn't always fully understand. "Jesus," I began, my voice trembling, still unable to shake off the fear from earlier. "Why did you do that? How can you make the waves quiet with just one word?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, his eyes as though seeing straight into the depths of my soul. Then he spoke, his voice gentle but filled with authority. "Don't you see? The storm is not something that comes from the outside. It originates from within your soul. And to make the storm outside calm, you must start from within." I didn't understand immediately. His words were like a riddle, a mystery that I had to figure out. But I knew one thing: I couldn't live in fear anymore. I had to face the storms within my own heart. We continued rowing, but my mind no longer focused on the sea. Questions about faith, life, and things I didn't yet understand kept swirling around me. Who was Jesus? He wasn't just an earthly king, nor was he an ordinary person. He was something vastly different, yet I felt he was everything I needed in life. We passed through a deeper stretch of water, where there was no light from the shore. The lake's surface was now pitch black, with only the dim light of the moon reflecting gently on the boat's movement. Even so, I felt safer than I ever had before. Jesus was still here, and I knew he would never let me sink. "Jesus?" I said again, this time with a steadier voice. "Do you ever feel afraid?" He turned to look at me, his eyes shining brightly, as if he saw something I could not. Fear is a natural thing for humans, but it is not something that will control us forever if we know how to face it. When you place your trust in me, nothing is impossible to overcome. I listened in silence to his words. They were like light shining into the darkness of my soul. Before, I had lived in fear of loss, fear of not being good enough, fear of not being able to change. But now, I felt a trust beginning to stir within me. Jesus was not only someone who healed outward wounds, but also the one who healed the wounds of my soul. A faint sound from behind made me turn. A large fish glided under the surface, the moonlight reflecting off it, making it shimmer like a small galaxy within the lake. But I no longer paid attention to the fish. I looked at Jesus, and for the first time I felt an odd peace. The peace I had never known before. He smiled gently, as though he knew what I was thinking. "Do not be afraid. I am with you." Those words, though brief, warmed my heart. I no longer felt alone. No matter how many storms surrounded me, I knew I would never be alone. Jesus was always with me, within me. The boat continued to glide through the dark night, but now I felt that I was being guided not only by Jesus' hands but also by a steadfast faith within my heart. The storm had passed, but my journey, the journey to my own self, to faith and light, was just beginning. Chapter 9: The Light from a House. The lake's surface was calm, and our boat continued drifting through the night, not in a hurry. Time seemed to pass gently, with only the sound of the waves softly lapping against the boat and our steady breaths. Jesus remained silent, his gaze always seeming to look toward a distant place, as though he knew something I couldn't understand. The night sky grew lighter, and the stars sparkled like jewels in the endless space. But for me, the only light I saw now was the light within my soul. The light I had never noticed before, the light of faith and peace. "Jesus, don't you feel tired?" I asked, unsure of what meaning this question had, but it was something I was curious about. After all the miraculous events, I didn't know whether he felt tired like a human or if he was something beyond my understanding. Jesus turned to look at me, a gentle smile on his lips. "I am not tired. Fatigue comes from worries and fears within you. When you place your trust in me, those things will no longer be a burden." I nodded, though I didn't fully understand everything he said, but I felt I was getting closer to something very important. A change not only outwardly, but from within. Suddenly, a strange light appeared in the distance, cutting through the darkness. A small house with a cozy porch, its yellow light flickering from the window, created an image like something from a dream. It seemed like a miracle. In the dim space of the dark night, the house appeared like a lighthouse guiding the way. "What is that house?" I asked, unable to take my eyes off the light. Jesus looked in the direction I pointed and smiled. "That is where you will find true peace. But to get there, you must walk a long road, a road where only faith can lead the way." I felt a strong pull in my heart. That was where I had to go. Not because I wanted to run away, but because I felt that place was the destination of my journey for peace. A peace I had never dared to dream of. Jesus nodded gently, as though he knew I would go there. Go, but remember, no road is easy. Sometimes you must face the things you do not want to in order to understand the true value of peace. We began rowing toward that house, the light from the window shining. Chapter 10: The Final Confrontation. The sun slowly rose, casting its first rays into the small house. The sky gradually brightened, as if nature itself was waking up with me. Jesus remained there, sitting silently by the window, the light from the oil lamp on the table casting a glow on his face, creating a magical stillness. I sat there, my heart filled with a peace I had never known before. But I knew my journey was not over. I felt a strong sense that something important was about to happen. A challenge, a final confrontation that I must face. Jesus looked at me, his eyes sparkling with profound understanding. You have found the place your soul needed, but there is no peace without facing yourself. I nodded, but inside, many questions and concerns still remained unanswered. I remembered the stormy nights on the lake, the waves that never seemed to stop, the times I felt swept away by anger, fear, and pain. I couldn't just live forever in a peaceful house. I had to face the outside world and myself. How will you overcome this? Jesus asked, his voice deep and patient. I don't know, I said, feeling the unease rising within me. I don't know if I have the strength to face the challenges out there. Jesus smiled, his smile gentle and full of love. You have strength within you, but that strength does not come from yourself. It comes from placing your complete trust in me. When you know that I am with you, nothing is impossible to overcome. His words were like a soft breeze that eased the heaviness in my heart. I realized I had been seeking strength in the wrong places, places where I could never find it. Strength is not about fighting alone. It's about walking with Jesus. I'm ready, I said, and although there was a hint of fear in my voice, I also felt a strong sense in my heart. My limits were about to be tested. We stepped outside, where the morning sunlight illuminated the sparkling lake. The scenery seemed more beautiful than ever, but I knew this beauty did not only come from the landscape. It also came from the change within me. I no longer saw a world full of darkness and uncertainty, but a world where Jesus was present, guiding my steps. Jesus stopped at the lake's edge, his eyes looking out over the water, where the waves were gently crashing against the shore. Do you see? The waves never stop, but they can still flow peacefully and naturally. So too with you, there are challenges you cannot avoid, but how you face them is what truly matters. I sat down, feeling the chill of the water still radiating, but it no longer made me shiver like it once did. Jesus sat beside me, his hands outstretched, as though inviting me to touch those very waves. Do you see these waves? He asked. I see, I replied, and I realized that these waves were not just natural waves, but the emotions and challenges in my life. Do not fear them. Only when you learn to face them and let go of fear can you truly live. I looked at the waves, no longer feeling afraid of them. I began to understand that each wave could bring a lesson, an opportunity for me to learn to relax and live in harmony with myself and the life around me. Suddenly, a large wave crashed onto the shore, strong and fierce. I watched it, and instead of feeling fear, I felt a strange sense of peace. That wave was not my enemy. It was a part of me. Jesus looked at me, his gaze as though waiting for something. "Are you ready to face life's challenges?" he asked. "I am ready," I replied, although my voice still trembled a little. But this time I did not feel alone. We stood up, and I realized that my journey was not just a journey across a lake, but a journey deep within my soul, where storms still exist, but I no longer feared them. "Come with me," Jesus said, and I understood that, no matter how great the challenges ahead, he would always be with me. Chapter 11, Walking Through the Darkness. The next morning, as the light of dawn parted the night, I woke up and felt a profound change in my soul. The small house where we had stayed was still warm and peaceful, but I knew we could not stay there forever. Each of us had to continue our journey. The peace I had found the night before was not the final destination, but the strength to move forward, no matter how many challenges lay ahead. Jesus was gone from the room when I awoke, as if he knew I needed some time to reflect and face myself. But even though he wasn't physically present, I still felt his presence in every breath I took. He was there, right beside me, whenever I needed him. I stood up and went outside. The sky was clear, as if nothing could hinder the life of the new day. The lake was still sparkling, and a gentle breeze blew across the grass along the shore, making the blades dance. But inside, I knew that last night had not been just a peaceful dream. It was a truth I needed to live. Jesus stood near the lake's edge, the light of the sun making him shine. He didn't turn to look at me, but I knew he sensed that I had awakened and was ready. "Can you walk through the darkness?" Jesus asked, his voice gentle but full of challenge. I stood still, not responding immediately. Darkness. I had grown accustomed to darkness. How many times had I searched for light, only to be swallowed by the shadows of fear, doubt, and failure? But now, the light of Jesus in me was so strong that I could not deny his question. "I can," I answered, though there was still a little apprehension. But this time it was not fear. It was determination. Jesus turned and looked at me with eyes full of trust. "Walk through the darkness, and you will find the light, and that light will never fade." His words were a deep promise, but I also knew that the light he spoke of was not something easily found. To receive that light, I had to dare to walk through the darkness of myself, the fears, the unhealed wounds, and the mistakes of the past. As I walked, I realized that the darkness was not something external. It was not the storms out there, nor the challenges I would face on the road. The darkness was within me, the things I had not dared to face, the fears I had hidden for so long. When I looked back, I saw Jesus still standing there, his eyes never leaving me. He said nothing more, but his presence made me know that I was not alone on this journey. I walked a few more steps, my heart anxious and fearful, but gradually, with each step I took, I felt a sense of relief. The worries no longer weighed me down. The darkness within me began to dissipate, like clouds parting from the sun. Each step I took became steadier, and I began to realize that the light was not far away. It was within me in every decision, in every step of faith. After a while, I stopped, feeling as though I had walked a long way. Now I was no longer afraid of the darkness. Instead, I felt a peace, a freedom I had never known before. Jesus came close to me, his arms wide open, as though welcoming me into a new place, a place of light and freedom. "You have done it," he said, his voice warm and full of pride. "You have walked through the darkness and found the light within you. This is the freedom you have always sought." I looked into his eyes, and for the first time, I felt that everything I had gone through, every challenge, every pain, had a purpose to help me understand the true meaning of freedom. Freedom does not come from avoiding darkness, but from facing and accepting it, and from there, finding the light right in the midst of life. We stood in silence for a moment, and I felt as if I had been reborn. The darkness of worries and fears was gone, replaced by a light heart, a healed soul, and a deep faith in the path Jesus had shown me. "Come with me," he said gently, and I knew that nothing could stop me anymore. My journey had started with the stormy days on the lake, but today, I had walked beyond the darkness, and I was ready to embrace the light. Chapter 12, A New Light. As my steps guided me along the winding roads, I no longer felt confused as I once had. Each time my foot touched the ground, I realized that no road was meaningless. Every experience, every challenge, was part of the journey, and though they seemed difficult, they always had a clear purpose to help me become the person I needed to be. Today, I felt as though I was walking on a different road. This road was not the one I had known, nor the one I had once dreamed of. It was not a paved path, but a road no one had walked before, a road where everything still felt fresh, where the light never faded. I no longer saw the darkness as I once did. Instead, soft lights illuminated each of my steps. I felt that I was no longer alone on this journey. Everything around me seemed to have a new meaning. Though I could not say exactly what it was, I knew for certain that everything around me was helping me find a new part of myself. Jesus was still by my side. He was always present, but never imposing. He was like a friend, a teacher, but more than that, he was the presence that helped me realize that, even in my darkest moments, I was never abandoned. We continued walking. The sky had brightened, not only because of the sunlight, but also because of the lights within my soul. Chapter 13, The Fire of Challenge. The sun had set, leaving behind a sky as dark as a cloak wrapped around the world. But inside me, a fire smoldered, warm and strong. After days wandering in the light of Jesus, I knew this journey was not only about light. It also held challenges, storms that I could not yet foresee. And I sensed that now, I had entered the most important part of my life. Jesus stood before me, his eyes sparkling in the soft light from the nearby fire. He said nothing, but I knew he was waiting for me to realize something deeper about myself. I felt a fire starting to blaze within me, a fire I had never known before. "Are you ready to face the challenge?" Jesus asked, his voice gentle yet full of seriousness. That question echoed in the stillness, a reminder that this path was not just a gentle journey, but a road filled with trials. Challenges would come, and I had to be ready to face them. I nodded, no longer feeling lost like I did in the early days. The peace I had found in my heart gave me the strength to face anything. "I am ready," I replied, my voice stronger than ever. Jesus smiled, his gaze full of empathy and love. The important thing is not what challenges come your way, but how you will respond when they do. The fire will test you, and it will burn away what is unnecessary, leaving only the purest things in your soul. His words were a reassurance that trials were not bad things. They were a necessary part of life, a way for me to become stronger, more resilient. And I understood that challenges were not punishments, but opportunities for me to grow, to become more aware of who I truly was. We continued down the narrow path, the firelight from the pile of logs casting shadows of the trees around us. Every step seemed meaningful, each one bringing me closer to an awakening within my soul. Suddenly, a strong wind blew through, bringing with it a strange sound from afar. The leaves rustled, but they were not the gentle leaves I had come to know. This was a powerful, almost fierce wind, as if it were warning of something about to happen. Jesus stopped, his gaze becoming sharper, as if he had seen something I could not. He looked at me, not saying a word, but in his eyes was a silent communication. "This is the moment," he said, his voice sinking deep into my veins. I looked around and suddenly realized I was standing in the middle of an empty field. The grass had withered, the ground was dry, and a heavy feeling filled the air. I could sense a shift in the atmosphere, as if a storm was approaching. Jesus looked at me once more and then moved forward. "You must walk through here. Every challenge, whether big or small, is an opportunity for you to rise. Do not fear, for I am always with you." With those words, I felt an overwhelming sense of trust fill my heart. I could not let fear control me anymore. No matter the storm, no matter how dark it got, I had found the fire within me, and I would not let it go out. We continued moving forward. The wind grew stronger, and the sky began to change color, as if welcoming a new challenge. Lightning flashed in the distance, and thunder echoed across the sky, but I did not feel afraid. The fire within me remained bright, and I knew I would overcome it all. The storm drew near, but I no longer felt the anxiety I once did. Instead, I felt an unusual calm, as if I were ready to face everything ahead. At that moment, the sky collapsed, and the storm hit. The wind howled, and the rain fell like a deluge, but I felt steady with each step I took. Every time the wind hit my face, I remembered Jesus' words, "The fire will test you, and it will burn away what is unnecessary." Amidst the storm, I realized that no matter how things were pushed or shaken, I stood firm. The fears within me no longer had the strength to defeat me. I no longer worried about what would happen next. I only knew that, no matter what, I would continue to walk. Because I knew in those challenges I was not alone. Jesus was always with me, guiding me through every hardship. Chapter 14, The New Path. The next morning, the sky was clear again, and the clouds had dissipated, leaving only the warm golden light of the sun shining everywhere. The storm of the previous night seemed like a faint memory, almost like a haunting dream, but in my heart, I knew it had changed me forever. I was no longer the person I had been. The challenges had sharpened me, making me stronger and more resilient. Jesus stood beside me, his gaze gentle and full of understanding. He said nothing, but I knew he understood me more than anyone else. After the storm, everything seemed clearer. What I had learned, what I had gone through, was not meaningless. Every step, every moment had a deeper meaning. Do you feel the change in your heart? Jesus asked, his voice soft like a passing breeze. I looked into his eyes, feeling the steadiness and peace in them. Yes, I answered. I feel that I have changed. What happened last night helped me realize that I no longer need to be afraid. I can face any challenge. Jesus smiled, his eyes full of pride. That is what you need to understand. Challenges are not meant to make you fall, but to help you rise. Each time you overcome a difficulty, you will grow. And then you will see that you can go farther than you ever thought possible. His words sank deep into my heart. I realized that every challenge had its purpose. Every difficulty contained a lesson, an opportunity to learn and grow. I no longer needed to seek a life without challenges, but a life that accepted and faced them with faith and inner strength. We continued walking on a new path I had never known before. The lush green meadows stretched before us, and the sunlight shone as a promise of a brighter tomorrow. I felt like I had been reborn, like a bird flying out of its cage into the freedom of the sky. Jesus walked beside me, saying nothing, but I could feel his presence strongly. Every step I took now was filled with hope. I no longer felt lonely. Jesus was the best companion I could ever have in this life. We passed through vast fields, green hills, and crystal clear streams. Everywhere we went, there was a sense of serenity, as if the whole world was welcoming us. And I realized that each of these places, each of these sights, held its own unique meaning. These were not just locations on a map, but parts of a journey I was walking, pieces of life I needed to explore. One day, we arrived at a small village nestled among vast fields of rice. The village was peaceful, with red-tiled houses, small stone-paved roads, and friendly people working outside. Everything was simple but held an indescribable peaceful beauty. Jesus turned to me, his eyes lighting up with deep understanding. This is a place where you will meet people who need you. They are not like you, but they will need you, just as you need them. I didn't understand right away, but I felt something strange in my heart. I had once thought this journey was my own, but now I realized it wasn't just for me. It was for everyone I would meet along the way. And I felt that each encounter, each person I met, was part of the plan Jesus had laid out for me. We stopped before a small house. An elderly woman came out, her eyes kind and full of experience. She smiled and greeted us. "Hello, children. What brings you here?" Jesus nodded gently. "We are just passing through and wish to learn about this village." The old woman invited us into her home, and we sat down to talk. In our conversation, I realized that this woman was not just an ordinary person. She had a deep wisdom, a knowledge of life I had never encountered before. She told us about the hardships she had faced, the losses, and the moments that seemed impossible to overcome. But she never gave up. She always believed that every difficulty had its reason, and every challenge carried a valuable lesson. "The path we walk is never smooth," she said, "but if we have faith and patience, we will find our way, no matter how hard it may be." Her words echoed in my mind like a song, a reminder of patience and faith. Just as Jesus had said, the path I was walking was not an easy one. But if I had faith and patience, I would overcome everything. We left the old woman's house after a long conversation, feeling lighter and inspired. I realized that this journey was not just about me, but about the people I encountered. Each person brought me a lesson, a change in the way I saw the world. As we continued walking, I felt a new feeling in my heart. I was not just someone seeking peace for myself. I was someone bringing peace to those around me. And I knew that this path, no matter how challenging, would lead me to the places I needed to go. Chapter 15, The Path of Forgiveness. We continued our journey, and with each step came new experiences, deeper lessons. The road was not always smooth, and we didn't always find peace right away. But one thing I had learned along the way was that every challenge had its purpose, and every difficulty would pass if we remained persistent. Jack đã nói, in our faith, one day, we arrived at a city by the sea, and it was there that I would learn one of the most important lessons of all. The power of forgiveness. I had heard about forgiveness, but never had I truly understood its depth. It was not just about letting go of resentment. It was about releasing the chains that bound my soul and finding freedom. That day, I met a man who had been wronged by the people in his life. He had been betrayed, hurt, and abandoned, and he carried that pain with him, never letting it go. But Jesus, with his gentle eyes, showed me how to help this man heal. Through forgiveness, he showed me that it was not the world that needed to change, but my heart. And once I forgave, I too would be free. With this new understanding, I began to forgive the things that had held me back. I let go of anger and resentment. I realized that forgiveness was not a weakness, but a strength. It was the key to peace, and it was the only way to move forward. And so, I learned to forgive, to let go of the past, and to live in the present. I knew that this was the true path to peace. And with Jesus by my side, I would continue walking this path, one step at a time. The journey was not over, but with each lesson, I became more and more prepared for what lay ahead. And no matter what the future held, I knew I would walk it with Jesus, my guide and my strength. Chapter 16, The Light of Faith. The story of the innkeeper left a deep impression on me, and with each passing day, I understood more clearly that this journey was not just about teaching or sharing miracles, but about showing people how to find peace in their souls. Jesus constantly reminded us of the importance of faith. Faith not only in the things we can see, but also in the things we cannot see. And sometimes, faith is the only flame that can guide us through the dark nights of life. One day, when we arrived at a village at the foot of a hill, I felt a different atmosphere. The small houses were scattered, and the winding roads seemed unfamiliar. But what struck me most was the stillness, the peace, as though everyone here was waiting for something. We stopped at a large house, its walls made of stone and its red-tiled roof faded by time. The people in the village weren't too numerous, and they looked at us with curious eyes, but there was no sign of warm welcome. In fact, I felt a hesitation, a reluctance, as if these people had been hurt too many times in the past. Jesus gestured for us to stop. "Let me talk to them," he said. We stood silently, watching as he approached a woman standing on the porch, holding a basket of fruit. She had a gentle appearance, but her eyes carried a deep sadness, something that only those who have experienced loss could understand. Jesus stood facing her, saying nothing for a moment. His eyes seemed to look deep into her, as though seeing into her heart. Then he spoke softly, "What are you waiting for?" The woman was silent, then sighed quietly. "We once had everything, but then everything collapsed. Land, homes, even faith. All of it vanished in one night. This village is no longer the place we knew, and I can no longer believe in anything." Her words were like a cold wind blowing through my heart. I understood her pain. When we lose the most precious things in life, faith can easily crumble, and hope seems to disappear into the air. Jesus looked at her with a gentle gaze. Sometimes, loss is not the end. Sometimes, it is the beginning of something new. Faith is not something that can be seen with the eyes. It is something we feel with the heart. The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with astonishment. "But how can I believe again when everything I loved has fallen apart?" Jesus smiled gently, and his words sounded like a whisper from nature. Faith is not something you can find in material wealth or fame. Faith is the strength to see the light in the darkness, to continue walking even when the road is rough. And when you believe in unconditional love, you will see that nothing can separate you from true peace. The woman stood silently, her eyes welling up, and it seemed that in that moment, she began to feel something changing inside her. A sense of relief began to creep into her soul. Jesus turned to us and motioned for us to continue the journey. But before leaving, he turned back and said, "We are not here to give you all the answers, but to help you find strength within yourself. Let faith guide you, and you will see the light in the darkest of nights." We continued forward, and I felt the atmosphere change. Jesus' words had touched the woman's heart, and perhaps, one day, she would rediscover the faith she had lost. Sometimes, the road is not easy, but it is those moments, those encounters, that serve as small lights helping us keep moving forward. We didn't know that, throughout this journey, we were being taught not only about forgiveness but also about faith in the good things, in the ability to overcome every hardship. And perhaps in the most difficult times, it is that very faith that will be the ever-burning flame in each heart. Chapter 17, Unity in Struggle. As the days passed, our journey was not only a physical one but also a spiritual journey, full of challenges and lessons. We met countless people, each carrying their own stories, their own pains, and their own hopes. But there was one common thing I noticed. In every hardship, people always find strength in unity. One morning, when we arrived at a small town nestled on the side of a hill, the sky was no longer as clear as usual. Dark clouds had begun to gather, casting a gloomy atmosphere. The streets were silent, with barely any people around, only a few shadows moving through the windows. Though it seemed that life had left this place, I sensed something very strange, an unease in the air. Jesus stopped, looking at each house, his gaze searching for signs of hope. "It seems like this place has been abandoned," I said, a bit worried. He smiled, his eyes as gentle as a soft breeze. "Never judge a place by its appearance, my dear. Good things are often hidden, and only patience can help us find them." We continued walking, and as we approached a large house in the center of the village, a woman came out. She looked weary, but her eyes did not show despair. Instead, there was a resilience that I could not ignore. "You are Jesus, aren't you?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with anticipation. Jesus nodded, and the woman stepped forward, her eyes full of pleading. "We have gone through too many hardships. This village used to be a peaceful place, but now we are losing everything. Families are drifting apart. No one trusts each other anymore. Without help, I fear we won't last much longer." Jesus looked at her, his gaze warm. Hardships are challenges that each person must face. But if we are united, we will be stronger than any difficulty. Sometimes, help doesn't come from grand things, but from small acts of kindness. The woman looked at Jesus, as if searching for a spark of hope in his eyes. "But we have tried everything, Lord. No matter how hard we try, the divisions still remain." Jesus replied softly, "Division is not something that cannot be overcome. Unity is the greatest strength of humanity. When a house is built on the foundation of love and understanding, nothing can break it." The woman stood silently. Jesus' words seemed to sink into every fiber of her being, and she began to feel something new growing in her heart. We continued through the village, and even though no one spoke, I could feel the atmosphere change. The villagers seemed to begin to open their hearts, their eyes no longer filled with suspicion but with longing. The woman had worked hard to rally the families in the village for a meeting, and when we returned in the evening, I saw them sitting together, talking and laughing. Jesus stood from afar, watching silently. We simply stood and felt the warmth returning. This wasn't just a meeting. It was the beginning of something much greater. Unity, understanding, and love were starting to sprout in hardened hearts. "Do you see?" Jesus said, turning to me. "Unity is not an easy thing, but when we place our faith in each other, the strength of the community will overcome all obstacles. And these people will see that, no matter how hard it gets, they are not facing it alone." I nodded, realizing that every step of our journey wasn't just a walk through new lands, but an exploration of the core values of humanity: love, forgiveness, and resilience. And in each person, we always found small sparks, beautiful things yet to be discovered, as long as we had enough faith to see them. As night fell, we left the village, but I knew the story of unity would never fade. Jesus had taught me that no matter how many difficulties or trials life presents, we will never be alone if we know how to unite and love one another. That is the true strength, the strength of community, of faith, and of love. Chapter 18: The Journey Home. The scenery around us began to change as the journey neared its end. The towering mountains still stood proudly, but now they were no longer a difficult challenge. Instead, every step in these mountains felt like harmony, as if nature itself was walking with us. As a companion, Jesus continued walking gracefully, his feet gliding over the rocky paths as if no obstacle could hinder him. But it was his gaze that imparted a profound lesson to us. He was not just the guide. He was the one igniting in us faith, strength, and perseverance. We had passed through many towns and met countless people. Each time, we listened to their different stories, their struggles, and the losses they faced. But there was one common thread. No matter how difficult, faith and love were the keys to overcoming everything. One morning, when we arrived at a small village by the river, a family welcomed us warmly. They were not wealthy in material things, but their love and hospitality were priceless. In the cozy space of their small home, we shared a hearty meal, and Jesus' story once again seeped into our hearts. People search for happiness far away, but in truth, happiness always exists in the simple things, in sincere relationships, and in the love we give one another, Jesus said, his eyes sparkling like the stars in the night sky. That evening lasted until the silver moonlight covered the earth. No one wanted to leave because, in those moments, we had found a part of the peace that Jesus had taught us, a peace not found in material wealth or fame, but in gratitude and unity. The next day, as we set off, there was a warm feeling, an understanding that our journey was not over here. Every step, every meeting had left a lasting mark in our hearts. Jesus was not just a teacher but a friend, a guide. He taught us not only the lessons of faith and love but also how to live in understanding and mutual respect. These values had become the solid foundation for every step in our lives.